Hope everyone's had a nice day. So, for those of you who don't know well, I am Tara Mitchell, aka the Gentle Sleep Specialist. I have worked with little ones now for probably about 18 years. It's been a long time. 7 of those were as a pediatric nurse, and 10 years of this now has been in the sleep space. And also working with parenting, behavior, boundaries, that sort of thing, as a parenting facilitator for the Circle of Security. So, we're going to talk tonight about toddler bedtimes, boundaries, all of that, right? Um, and I will absolutely be sending out a recording for you guys if you've missed it, or if you miss it or have to leave halfway or that sort of thing. So, when we talk about little ones now, guys, I'm just going to jump and check one thing. Just checking we're definitely on recording. Oh, good. Okay, so when we talk about toddlers and toddler bedtimes, and if we were talking about behaviors and boundaries and all of that sort of thing, what's really important is to firstly make sure that we look at what's happening in that lead up to their bedtime. So, at any point, if you're thinking, should I drop my toddler's nap? Or, should I be capping their nap? Or why are they fighting their bedtime? A lot of you may have heard me talk about this, but the most common reason is typically it's about what's happening in that lead up to bedtime. And before you ever consider dropping a nap or capping a nap, I really want you to look at that first. So, what I want you to look at is in the lead up to bedtime, is my toddler getting really zoned out? Are they having screen time? Are they just sitting there, sipping on their little sippy cup of milk or their bottle of milk and, having this downtime? Are we in this cycle of doing 10 books right before bed? That sort of thing, right? So I want you to check that lead up to bedtime first, right? And if you go, yeah, no, like we're all playing, we're engaged, that's great. But if your toddler is fighting bedtime, or you're thinking, gosh, their bedtime's just falling later and later, should I cap the naps? You need to check, because if they're having that screen time, if they're having those drowsy feeds or lengthy feeds, they're more likely to lose their sleep pressure, which will then mean a second wind, which makes bedtime really hard, right? So never cut, never cap until you check their sleep pressure. Okay. And so I like the idea of no screen time within 3 hours of bedtime. If you've got a little one that just gets home from daycare or school, maybe if you really need, say, 30 minutes, that's fine. But after that, guys, the most important part next is that we want to check that sleep pressure. The next thing we want to do is check connection, right? Because point of view, you've been at work all day or school all day or they're at daycare all day, you come home, TV's on, so there's like no time for you guys again at that point. And then basically from there, you're like, now we've got this series of requests in order to get to bedtime. And they're like, well, hold on a sec, like, pick me, like, I need my cup filled, I need that attention. And so they'll take that time from the bedtime, because finally at bedtime, they're like, you, it's you, mum and dad. Like, it's us, it's our time, right? And so, what we want to do is we want to obviously check those other things. We want to check that we've got the right sleep pressure. We want to check the awake times and all of that. And then after that, we really want to make sure that we're then going, right, we've checked all of that. We've added more awake time if they're having a hard time going down, especially if they're sort of 2 and over, they may need closer to 6 hours. We're really checking that, or they might be on no nap, um, and they haven't had the opportunity to lose that sleep pressure. And then we're checking off their connection boxes. So we're having plenty of time to play with them, to be with them, and to actually make that bedtime routine as connection full as possible. So the reason is again, they're going to take from other points, but also little ones are designed, in fact, we all are, to connect and to belong. And what we are finding more and more these days is that we have peer raised children. So, Dr. Gabor Mate comes out, like, sort of speaks really in depth around this. There's a book called Hold On to Your Kids. It is the most, for sure, by far, the most recommended book I will ever tell you to read. But essentially, the whole understanding is that children now are going into school younger, they're going into daycare from young, and they're surrounded by their peers more than surrounded by parents. And this might not always be the case. But then as they get into the schooling, they then got sports, then we go out and catch up with friends, from school, and that's all good. But it has to be that we are collecting our kids. So after these things, after school, after work, after daycare, whatever it is, we're coming back to that connection time with them. Because here's what we know: when resistance is high, connection is low. When connection is high, resistance is low. And so if you're having a lot of, especially if you're having a lot of defiance around things, everything seems to be a big task, like it's hard work to get the littlest things done possible, we have to look at, have we connected to directed first? And honestly, it might sound a little bit more like it's extra effort or work it to begin with. But every time, I want you to remember this, every time you're taking a shortcut, you're taking the long way around. Trust me. It's like you tried to take the shortcut and you end up like totally screwing it because there's like a dead end or it takes you somewhere else or whatever else. And you always kind of think like, oh boy, that like was a flop. Well, parenting is much the same. When you say quick, okay, yep, just chuck them in front of the screens because it's easier. Yes to things because it's easier, all of that, not holding those boundaries that you actually know that you want to, hold. Essentially, what ends up happening is that children, firstly, then their little brains are in charge. So, this is the same with bedtime. We're going to talk about boundaries soon. So, we want to make sure instead we've got that connection down pat so that when we are asking things, we're in relationship. So I want you guys moving forward, and this is so important whether or not it's behavior or sleep. We've got, 45 minutes to cover this. And what I want you guys to know is that being in relationship, that is a mutual respect, a love, a connection, time, presence, active listening, being in relationship with your toddlers and choosing hard when you need to will always like reward you essentially with a much easier route. And for every time you say a quick yes, mark my words, you will probably be catching up on that, or be that will come back and bite you in the ass probably within the next 30 minutes with something else. Right. And so that time is really important because with our peer raised children, what happens is as they get older, the really sad part is they start to seek more connection from their peers. They start to only listen to their peers. They start to want to conform and belong to their peers. And the thing is that peers, so schoolmates, friends, whatever it is, and even young, they don't give you unconditional love. They don't give you judgment free. They don't give you nurturing and boundaries and good leaders and experience that us as parents do. And so we want to make sure that we're after school, like we're recollecting our kids, we're having time together, we're having a shower together when they're younger. If we need to, they have to have a shower, but we don't have time for connection like that. Dinner table time together, a little game before bed together, books together, whatever it is. When they get older, the same ideas. I'm collecting my kids back. They've spent all day. It's time for me to be in relationship with them because then what happens is when they're in relationship with you, it's essentially like saying like they owe it to the relationship. You have a sense of authority still with them. They care what you think. They want to do the right thing in ways. Of course, there's moments where they don't, right? But that's so imperative because without that, if they don't care really what you think, like they're just seeking the approval from their friends and those groups, then that's a really, really sad path, right? And then we wonder why we've got so many teenagers who are, yeah, essentially, losing their life because of bullying and things like that. Because essentially what happens is it matters so much what their peer family thinks about them when really we want them to come home to their family. Whereas a lot of kids are coming home and getting on their screens or their phones to be with their family, right? And they're not getting the same feeling of unconditional love and things like that because their parents don't have that influence. So this starts from really young. So when your kids are home, scrap the screens where you can, because again, it's just going to essentially ruin their appetite for sleep. So it inhibits their drowsy hormone and things like that. But we're also missing out on that connection time, right? And if you're home with them all day, just being mindful. I've actually been with you all day, but like I haven't even stopped to look at you in the eyes when you speak, or I haven't even, and guys, like I get it. We're all like it's tricky, and it's such a parenting is such a roller coaster and all of that. But it's like, I haven't even really sat down with you today. I haven't even, just thinking about that at points. Like, we were at the shows and then we're doing this and then you went for your nap and then we woke up and then we're on to the next thing and I've scheduled a million things. And instead of just slowing things down. Okay. So finding that connection, slowing it down. Now, the next thing is boundaries for our toddlers. And again, all of this is going to be the same in parenting and sleep, right? So this webinar is essentially going to be on parenting and sleep. So this is why it's really important that we see when, especially when we come into toddlerhood, like they're very, very intertwined, right? And so the next thing we sort of want to pay attention to is looking at, right, now we've got our boundaries in the lead up to bedtime. If you've got a toddler who's fighting bedtime, I love the idea of a bit of a checklist in the lead up to bedtime. So we've had the connection, we've expended the energy, they haven't lost their sleep pressure. Now we're looking at that boundary part. So what's happening is that it's very normal for your little ones to start to kick off at bedtime and not want this or prolong it or ask for this and that and have a million requests in the lead up to bedtime, right? And what I want you to do is get I will actually send it in the email, but essentially a stamp chart in the lead up to bedtime. And on that you can put like brushes teeth, gets pajamas on, whatever it is, right, in the lead up to bedtime. I want you to mix it up a bit. Getting to the end of the day and waiting too late to then be like, right, bath, pajamas, book, bed, like teeth. It's so boring for them to do those things, aside from maybe a bath, but like pajamas, brush your teeth, go to the toilet, like whatever it is, right? Change your nappy, get you dressed, a cup of water, that sort of thing. There's nothing to entice them to do that. But what if, like, I was coming alongside of my toddler and being like, are you playing with that truck? Let's go brush the truck's teeth too. Or I'm going to bring your toothbrush to you today because you're busy playing. I can see that. Because they deserve that. They deserve that sort of respect of like, well, you're busy doing this. And I know that they're just doing like the they're just playing with their toys and things like that. Or it might be just that you come alongside of them and you're like, hey, bud, in a few minutes, we're going to go brush our teeth. Now, even if you've got a 2-year-old, this is really important, right? But trying to mix it up a little bit, moving things a bit forward. So if you can do the bath a bit sooner, so we're not trying to do like a list of 5 things and 5 requests in a row right before boring bedtime is the reward, right? Like it's not like at the end of all of this, like we're saying, brush your teeth, get dressed, like blah, blah, we're going to Disneyland. It's like do all of this and now let's get to boring bedtime, right? Because kids aren't usually like, until they're older and you can't get them out of bed, they're not usually like, yes, bedtime, right? To some degree anyway. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we've got that in that lead up to bedtime. We want to make sure that we've had that checklist. We're mixing it up. We're trying to make it fun. We're coming alongside of them. We're respecting what they're doing and giving them the heads up. And then holding the boundaries. So when they then say, no, I'm not doing this and have a hard time, the best thing that we can do when it comes to boundaries is being really solid on the boundary. So, for example, no, we've had 3 books, we're not doing anymore. 2 books, we're not doing anymore. And you'd put 2 books on the stamp chart. And then your toddler's going to be like, I want more books, for example. And you can acknowledge, I know you want more books. So we have to reiterate it so they know that we've heard them. But we're not having any more books tonight. It's time for bed. And then we don't keep harping on about it. Now, you guys can use this for any case. We're not having an ice cream today. We've had Jimbaroo. We're about to go home, for example, right? We can maybe another time, but you don't want to then get into the topic. So then if you start saying, well, ice cream, blah, 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 it's not good. And maybe you can have an ice cream another day. And well, we've done too many books. And oh, if we do books this time, you don't want to get into it. The boundary's set. We're not having any more books. When you come with an energy of, I'm so okay with this, I'm calm, but I'm really confident in the boundary that I'm holding, it's a different feeling. If you then start to negotiate, talk about that ice cream of another time, or maybe this, or well, you can have on it, not it, like whatever else it is, right? There's just this tug of war, there's this dialogue, and you're opening it up to more and more coming in, right? And especially when you start negotiating, will you have this? No, I don't want that. Would you want these? No, I don't want that. And you just end up in this position where you've essentially just given them their own way, but it was just something different, right? So we don't want that. We want to be able to hold that boundary. But our kindness comes in that their big feelings, not behaviors, but their big feelings are welcome. So they're allowed to cry that they're not getting to, read another book or have another ice cream. They're essentially allowed to have their big feelings around the thing that we've held in place, but the boundary doesn't change. Okay. When they're having their big feelings, it doesn't come with looks like this. What is wrong with you? Like that look. Or just like, so over this. I'm so over your behavior, whatever it is. Can't do that. We need to try not to. And there's moments and we're all going to falter and fall and get back up and all of that, right? But when we can, we need to allow our little one to know that they're big feelings that they're learning to process, because remember, a lot of adults can't even process their own emotions, that they're learning to process are safe, they're welcome, we want them out, we don't want to shut them down. Really important for dads a lot of the time. If they see their boys crying, they want to shut that behavior, that, emotion down, because they think they're weak and they're not going to survive and school's going to be tougher if they show emotion and things like that, right? Essentially, that's just going to cause problems down the track. What we want to do is we want to encourage those feelings out. We want to take the bus with them, right? We'll ride the bus with them. We'll live under a bridge with them. We'll do whatever with them, which means we're coming alongside of them and being like, I love you. I know you're having these big feelings. I'm here, but also not being over the top, like not trying, oh, hug me, I'll make it better. Like most of the time, they don't want that in that moment. Bit of space, you're still there. You're not scolding them. You're not sending them to their room. You're not looking at them shamefully as much as you can with all of that. And then usually when they're ready, they'll take a big, or you might, as they're starting to soften, because they need to get through the anger and the frustration and get all the feelings out, then you might see them shift and you might be like, sweetie, do you want to cuddle now? I know it's hard. I know you wanted it. Come for a cuddle. And then you'll bring them back in, right? And then we move on from there. If it's, for example, hitting or that sort of thing, you might just hold them away from you. I'm not going to allow you to hit me. We don't hit. I won't let you hit me. And you say that really sternly and very confidently. For example, you just stop that hitting behavior. But of course, we're not hitting, biting back, that sort of thing, right? Because they just don't know how to process those feelings at this point. But actually, a lot of the time, our toddlers are more scared of their own feelings and their own reactions and behaviors than what we are. Often they're so in this cycle and then they hit and they just get even more worked up because inside they don't know how to handle it and they don't want to hit. They don't want to do the things that they sometimes are urged or compulsive. They don't have that brain capacity to think this is a bad decision in this moment, especially when they're in their fight and flight, right? And so if we can always approach the feelings when it comes to the lead up to bedtime with, I am boundaried, right? I'm so okay with my boundaries. I've checked everything else. There's no point just having boundaries when you're putting them to bed an hour early, right? I've checked everything else is all in check. If you think I'm not sure about the naps, you might sort of cap it initially for a bit or that sort of thing. Guys, just 2 seconds. I'm very, very off. Yeah, 2 seconds. You might sort of cap it initially, right? So you might sort of go, okay, I'm going to cap it to maybe half an hour and see how I go, or I'll just nap them on the weekends or things like that. So you can definitely trial that. You might trial a later bedtime first and see if the, settle works. But all these other things are really important next, and there's, this saying from Dr. Becky, it's good inside. Our little ones were born good inside. And I think most of us were born good inside. Um, and so I really feel like it's just thinking of it, and you're not always going to get it right. You aren't. It's really, you're going to have moments and you're going to be tested and all of that. But if you can then look at it and be like, right, you know what? I was just really hard on that one, or I totally slipped up. Like I really dropped the ball. I lost my shit, whatever it is. You go back to your baby and you go like, I'm sorry. Not if you just didn't do that, I wouldn't have done that. It is full responsibility. I'm sorry that mummy yelled so much yesterday or today or whatever it is. I love you. Nothing will ever change. I always love you. And when I yell, it doesn't mean I love you less. The end. Not, but if you can just not do that again, because you couldn't not do it when you had big feelings, right? How can we expect that a 3-year-old doesn't not do it when they have big feelings? And bedtime is one of those places because they know that that separation is coming. Everyone's tired. And guess what? Our energy by the evening time is usually pretty abrasive. Not always, but sometimes we're at the end of it too, right? And so we're like, done. Get to bed. And the littlest things are just so frustrating. You're just like, I do not want a third game. Like, I do not want this or that. Like, and you don't want the fight and you can't be bothered with it. And if only they would just go to bed, right? And they're probably thinking, if only X, Y, and Z, And so it's really important that we try and remember that always when it comes to boundaries during the day, for sleep, whatever it might be. And then essentially from there, when it comes to bedtimes with our toddlers, we really want to make sure that now a lot of people say, my little one needs me to sit by the bed. I have to sit on the bed, stay in the room, get into bed with them. They're in my bed, whatever else it might be. So we've gone through that lead up to bedtime. We've looked at more awake time, connection, sleep pressure, boundaries, that side of things, the STAM chart. The next thing when it comes to bedtime is really making sure you check. Now, when it comes to bedtime, am I having to sit in there to fully put them to sleep? If you've got night waking, there's every chance it's because your little one is using you in some way to fall asleep and associate with sleep. So if you're sitting there reading them books till they're drowsy, if you're having to stay by the door or linger back to the door a number of times, there's every chance that that is essentially what's causing the issue in ways. Guys, just give me one sec. I actually get really bad. It's so annoying. I get as some people would know who follow me, is it's called vestibular migraines. And if I look at screens, I don't know what it is for too long. Whenever I do migraines, I start to feel like I'm dizzy. I'll this out, which is why I'm not looking at it all the time. Okay. So basically what we're going to have when it comes to that lead up to bedtime is that we've had all of that in place. Now, if you're getting lots of waking, it's because you're having to play the role at the beginning of the night. So what we want to do is we want to move you to a point where you say goodnight, put your little one down and step out of the room and walk totally away. When you can get to that point, you will end up with a far like better through the night settles, right? Especially if you've got good boundaries during the night time, you know how to manage it. Now, if your little one, if you're at a point where you're like, yes, that's me, I'm having to walk, check back a number of times, or they know that I'm lingering in the hallway, or yep, I'm totally in their room, whatever it is, or they're in my bed, I need to make changes, or they're going to a big bed, what you want to do, it's the worst analogy in the world, but it's the one that I explain better. If you think about it this way, imagine taking a puppy to a park that you're trying to teach something new to. So you're trying to teach this boundary around bed. But for example, you take them with a really long lead or no lead. So when you're trying to go into the kitchen and you're walking your little one back 32 times a night and not making eye contact, essentially, you're not going to teach them anything that way. If you're going to the kitchen, they get out and you just say, go back to bed, that sort of thing, right? It's not that you're not teaching them. What you often have to do is get closer. So essentially shorten the lead. It's the worst, but be in their room, be closer whilst you're teaching, whilst you're establishing boundaries, and then you can move away. So my preference would be if you're stuck, a night by the bed, night middle of the room, night door, right? And then you've essentially got this boundary that I'm happy to stay, sweetie, but you need to lay quietly. Okay. And the whole idea is that they are essentially learning that you're happy to be there, but they need to lay quietly. For example, in that moment, we're not just there to be audience to a performance. If your little one is mucking around at bedtime, step out. I'm happy to be here, but I'm not here on your time to just like be an audience to this performance. Again, though, you filled that connection box because sometimes that can be the reason why they're doing seeking behaviors at that time. And so, what you're essentially doing is making sure that you are moving away. You're moving to a point where you do get out of the room, but you've got that boundary in place in the interim. And then, what I would recommend is that once you get to a place where you can say goodnight and you don't have to be sitting in the chair, then you do a few checkbacks initially and you start to span. Right. We really talk in the toddler sleep program like to this, like exactly how to, and we can navigate and troubleshoot as you go along to make sure that it's all like, it's depending on how your little one is going with it. But the idea is that we're coming in close, establishing the boundary. The boundary is staying quietly, it's not sleep. We're not putting any pressure on the word sleep, go to sleep, anything like that. I want sleep to be removed from everyone's vocabulary. It is laying quietly, it's bedtime, that sort of thing. But lay quietly is the most common that I use, and that is the instruction. It's time to lay quietly, and I'm happy to stay. But I'm not happy to be an audience to a performance, especially not if it's just like really sort of, yeah, silliness, that sort of thing. Now, if you're getting a lot of silliness at bedtime, there's a couple of things I want you to check. It's firstly the connection side, but secondly, that sleep pressure side. What happened to reboot them before bed? And often it screens, especially as they get a bit older. As much outdoor time that you can have in the lead up to bedtime, you will win at bedtime. The reason is because I don't know if you guys ever go camping and you notice that when you go camping, you're essentially so tired by 8 p.m. You have no clue of the time. You're just like so ready. That's because we're getting the exposure to the circadian rhythm. Is stimulating our melatonin, which is our drowsy hormone. So if you can do picnics outside for dinner on the grass, sit outside in the patio, have some playtime in the evening outside, like as much outdoor time as possible is so amazing for their sleep. It just in general, even throughout the night. So that's the other thing. So in terms of that bedtime, you want to bring them close, establish the boundary, and then essentially moving away as well. You don't want to obviously keep getting stuck there, you know. And once you get then out of the room, same idea. If they come get out, right? If you don't get stay in your bed, I'm coming back to shut your door for a moment, or I might, for example, be like, right, you need to stay in your bed and lay quietly, and I'm going to come back and check on you, right? So you've got an action and a reaction, and there's different ways that you can do that, but there has to sort of be a currency at play. It can't just be that you're like, I've returned them 32 times and not made eye contact. Like often that in itself won't work, you know? And then during the nighttime, if you're on night two and you're by the in the middle of the room, you'd essentially go back to that spot with that same boundary. Essentially, rather than saying, well, if it's 4 a.m., I'll just bring them into my bed. Because remember, your little ones don't understand grey rules. Okay. So if you bring them in at 4, then you get to bring them in at 2 or 1 because they don't understand the difference. And that's the next thing with the morning time. When they get up, I would just encourage some playtime, a little bit of like hangout time, and then some solids, for example, rather than getting up and getting straight onto a milk bottle, into your bed, or screens. They're the 3 things that tend to encourage little ones to get up earlier. I love the use of a grow clock, but you have to make them work. They don't just magically work. For a lot of kids, you have to keep returning your little one. But also remembering at the same time that any time from 5:30 a.m. onwards is normal. So if your little ones are waking up a bit earlier than that, you could use that grow clock. But I would also check, okay, we got some early morning waking here. What time is bedtime? Let's try a bit of an earlier bedtime. Often early morning waking can be caused from overtiredness. Can we try a bit more, a bit less awake time, or do we need to try more awake time? How long is their nap? Are they 3 and still having a 2-hour nap? Could it be that they're ready for a little bit lesser nap, say an hour and a half? For example, to see if they then put that into their morning time. But any time from that 5:30 a.m. onwards, are they warm enough, or is it because they kick their doonas off, they've got no other cover, you know? So do we need to dress them in, you know, warmer pajamas so we don't have to rely on the doona, or, you know, control their room temp or things like that, right? And that's really, really important when it comes to that early morning waking period. So checking that is going to be really important. Most little ones will drop their naps sometime between 2.5 and 3.5. At 2, I wouldn't recommend dropping their nap natural. Like even if they're fighting it, it's usually that they need some, like we need to give some guidance around that nap. But typically between 2.5 and 3.5. When you know, one of the things that you can tell is that if your little one isn't napping and they go in the car at 12 or 10 or whatever and they stay awake, it's a good sign, right? It's not necessarily like a lot of people say, I dropped their nap and they were really tired by 4 p.m. So I kept it, but now everything's a shambles and they're nearly 4, right? And that's not a good indicator. It takes some time when you drop your nap for your little one to adjust to no nap. And so they are quite tired in the afternoon or evening. However, a lot of the time they can keep it longer just with their looking at their sleep pressure. Are they refusing their naps because they don't have enough awake time? Are they refusing the nap because you're still trying to nap them from 2 years, 3 months onwards? You're still trying to nap them in their cot or car, sorry, cot or bed. Because often, like just over 2 and onwards, it's very like plausible that they won't nap unless they're in the car or the pram, right? So is it that you keep pushing for that nap in the cot or bed, and that's what's then, you know, derailing it, and then it can make bedtime settles really hard as well, right? Are they losing that sleep pressure before the nap? You know, is it that you're, you know, on the way home from something, they're just getting too zoned out, too drowsy, and then they won't settle for the nap. So instead, keeping them really awake. And then when you think, no, we've, you know, capped the nap as minimally as we can, you know, the 30 minutes. Now their bedtime's pushing back. They're coming 3 and above, for example. That's when you might look at just a nap every other day or on the weekend, or perhaps they're just ready to drop it in general, right? So that's sort of what I would focus on when it comes to their naps or those transitions. when it comes to transitioning from a cot into a bed, the closer to 3 years and over, the better. They've got better cognitive understanding, negotiation, they understand consequences, they understand risks more better. Your boundaries are typically more established. When it comes to closer to 2, I know sometimes it's impossible because they might climb out, but essentially you're better off working with a physical boundary at that point because the mental boundary is trickier, right? I would make the change when they are asleep is in a good patch. For example, you can make it exciting. You might leave the cot up in the room if you can fit both. And then if they keep, getting out or whatever, you might put them back in their cot. But it's really important to make sure the first night you're just making it exciting, but you're holding those boundaries in the lead up to bedtime. And essentially, what you're also going to do is on that first night, you can sort of return them a few times, but after that, you might bring in that warning. Sweetie, you need to lay in your bed quietly. The door's open. Mum will come back and check on you. Don't automatically just sit in there if they're not used to that. If you keep getting out, then you might have to go back into your bed so that I know that you're safe, for example, right? But we don't want to just move them into the cot and then automatically just start sitting on to their bed, sorry, and then automatically just start sitting on the end of their bed. Alrighty. So I want some time to go through the questions. So if you guys have got questions, pop them in, and then we'll go from there. Okay, Charlene, this is for toddlers, but I would check their sleep pressure. So are they getting zoned out on feeds? Can you try more at wake time? So start with 3.5 and try out to 3 hours 45, up to 4 hours, but probably a bit closer to 3 hours 45, and make sure they're not getting zoned out on their feeds as well, hun. Any questions? Wanted to, yeah, definitely get some in before we wrap up. And just to touch, guys, in terms of the boundaries, in terms of that connection and that sort of thing, it's like I was saying that often whenever you think it's like harder, it's really not. Same with the screen time. If you have a lot of screen time, you're just going to see it in behavior, sleep, attention ability, all of that sort of stuff. So keep that in mind. Okay. So to explain, when it comes to if you think, oh my gosh, our little one's just really struggling with this, we need some more support, we have our online program. I'm going to be sending out a discount for our online program. It teaches you everything in detail. So what to do with bedtimes, what to do with the settles, how to progress, all of that. So you guys will get that emailed plus your essentially your recording of this. But yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I'm always here. I'm always happy to answer. Yeah, you know where I am. Awesome. I'm gonna wait another moment, see if there's any questions. Pleasure. Thank you guys for joining tonight. Perfect. All right. Big love, guys. See you soon. Bye bye.